Hi, I'm Keel Johnson. Welcome to Play Politics. I would like to welcome back Rick Leeds. Rick is an independent researcher in Fairfax City and blogger on 53% Government Cost Crisis. And Vincent Scott. Vincent is an active member of the Fairfax County Republican Committee and purveyor of the satire website, facebook.com/political. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being here. Well, let's dive right into it. Let's talk about the new tax reform and how exactly that's going to affect everyone. Rick, how do you think that is going to affect people?
I think the first thing that should be said is that we should take a step back and talk about the tax system in general, because the first thing that's on people's minds is the fair share of taxation issue. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just go over that briefly.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
It's often said that the wealthy are not paying their fair share.
Right.
I'm not in that group. But the Congressional Budget Office has repeatedly, not just done one study, but done repeated studies on the subject. And what they have consistently found is that overall federal taxation is, on average, effectively progressive. That is, as income increases, the level of taxation on the marginal income goes up. So in other words, the income over $250,000 is taxed at about a 30% rate. The income below $250,000 is taxed at about a 16% rate. The tax increase that we had in 2013 increased the already existing effective average taxation for total federal taxation. So that's one thing. And if you want to independently verify what I'm saying, you could just Google CBO effective rates or effective tax rates, and you'll see the studies on that. Now, this tax bill, I think a lot of people are concerned about the progressivity of the bill, first and foremost. And we're hearing that 80% of the of the cuts are going for the wealthy, for the people over 250.
Now, if I can interrupt you for a minute, is that because of the assets that the people in that higher bracket tend to have? Is that why?
This is not on assets. That's income that's already taxed or is not yet taxed, so-called unearned income, as they sometimes call it. This is just on income, ordinary income, corporate income, pass-through income, just investment income. And that 80%, sometimes I've heard 62% of the total tax cut, the aggregate amount, is going for the folks, for the income earners above 250. That excludes the first 10 years of the tax cut. There's actually a table on JCT, Joint Committee for Taxation, that shows the aggregate dollar amounts for each income group. And the income over $500,000 gets $60 billion in 2019. The total tax cut is $260 billion. So $200 billion of the cuts is for the income below $500,000, which is roughly about 1%, the top 1%, maybe 1.5%, something like that. So the reason why that could not be extended beyond the 10 years is because of something called the Byrd Rule. You might know more about it than I do. I don't really know much about it. But they can always extend that after 10 years. So it's about 23% of the tax cut is going to the top 1%, which is roughly equivalent to the income share out of total income. So it actually reduces, actually, I'm sorry, it increases the actual total progressivity. So I'll just finish up on this. So if the top, let's say 2%, earn about 28% of total, or say 25% of total income share, and they pay about 28% in taxes, after this tax cut, it'll go to about 29. So December JCT, if you want to look at that table, you're free to do so.
So Vincent, for those of us who are not necessarily understanding of the percentages and all that, is there a way that you can, I don't want to say dummy it down, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it, dummy it down a little bit for those of us who still are having a hard time figuring out what it exactly means for the poor, the middle class, and the rich.
Well, the first thing that it means is starting next month in February, everyone's tax rates change.
Right.
So everyone that gets a paycheck beginning some form of pay that had previously been taxed will be taxed differently, and in 80% of the case, lower. Mine, for example, will be lower. I've already looked at the tax tables, and they're going to be taking out less tax on my earnings, and that's going to be across the board. So everybody, poor, if you're a working individual or have an income, you are going to see the effects of this tax cut and the tax change. The other thing that I hope we see, and I'll be honest with you, this tax revision, the reform, it's the largest since 1996 when Reagan did the tax
86.
changes. 86, yes. But I wanted to see it simplified even more. I mean, there's a lot of things that remain in the tax policy, like student loans, mortgage, being able to deduct your state and tax, things that originally I believed that they were going to clear out all of that, and it was just going to be pretty much a straight rate. I would like, when I have to file my taxes for 2018, I surely hope that the form is much simpler.
Yes.
That I'm just able to actually look at it and do it myself without having to get a CPA or someone to help me. They're promising that it will be. That part we'll have to wait and see.
Okay. What if you're a single parent? What does the single parent need to know with this new tax reform?
Well, they expanded the child credit. They increased that. I don't know what the number was, but I believe it's up to 3,000 might be the number from 1,500. That I'm not exactly sure on where that finally fell. But I know that they increased this because Marco Rubio was holding his vote until they did.
Right.
And you've doubled the standard deduction from $12,700 to $24,000 for an individual person. So there should be everyone should, a single parent, a head of household, those are both benefits to them and their tax burden. How much that will be, it just depends on what the income is and what their taxable earnings is at the end of the year.
Okay. And what about middle class versus upper middle class? Is there going to be that much of a difference?
There are there remain in the tax code 7 levels. Okay. All of those levels, though, are different than they were previously, with a lower tax amount to those tax codes. I don't know exactly where those break out now. They changed a little bit about who fell into this. Somebody that might have been middle income may now be would be in a lower category. Depends on where they were in the middle income category. So until everyone can go to the government website though, and all the tables are actually there, they can look them up, and as I did, to see where I'm actually going to fall. And I am going to do better. Yes. Yeah. So.
Okay. Do you suggest that people have an accountant to help them work through exactly what it's going to mean to them, or do you think that they possibly may make it a little easier
I think
online?
for the average person that's not got a lot of investments, that they're going to be able to work through it themselves.
Okay.
If you've got a lot of disposable income that you're using as investment assets,
Right.
you might want to look a year or two down the future to see
Like if
how
you
it's going to
If you
affect.
own additional properties
Exactly.
and things like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
To see how it's going to affect you in the long run, because you may want to redistribute some of your assets. I'm not in that category.
Yeah. Okay, well, hopefully it'll, like you said, it'll be a little easier to understand. So, Rick, did you have anything else to say
Well, I
regarding it?
agree very much with the first point on overall simplicity. The Government Accountability Office in 2005 did a report on the total inefficiencies in the federal tax system. And if you take those percentages that they used of the economy and you apply them to today's economy, including compliance costs, which is time and money to comply with the system, and the other, they call them external costs because it's besides the actual payment of the taxes. It comes to about 700 to 800 billion per year, just from the federal tax system inefficiencies. So that's the economic hit from that complex system. Now, how much will this bill reduce that? I mean, I've heard on, I read on Cato Institute, it was like a 50% reform. And I think Chris Edwards from Cato was saying it's going lower. It probably wound up at about 40 to 35. That wouldn't shock me. So it was that in combination with actual rate cuts. So it's a tax reform, partial tax reform / rate cuts, which is not, and I agree with you, what is ideal. But that is all you can get out of these guys in the Senate and the House. They don't understand the economic importance of vast simplification. So,
one other aspects, though, of the tax reform, you asked specifically about individuals, but in the economic gains, not for individuals, but just for the country itself, is projected to be enhanced from the tax reform. I mean, there's a deficit to it. The CBO says 1.46 trillion in 10 years of deficit that this tax reform is going to put a burden on onto the country. However, I'm pretty sure that their numbers were at a 2% GDP when they did their calculations of that. And I just pulled off the GDP for the last 2 quarters, and we're well above 3% now. And if you want to believe President Trump or those who tout this tax reform, the enhanced economic stimulus that it's going to provide will keep us at, they want to get to 4%. That's been a long time since we've been at 4%. That's back in that's back in Clinton and Reagan era times. But over the last 5 years, we've averaged 1.86%. So there's a lot of room to improve, and if that improvement does come about, that improvement will offset some of this deficit. It's just in expanding the tax base, more people with jobs, better jobs, higher paying jobs.
We just don't know yet if it's going to
we've got
direction.
to see how it plays out.
Okay. All right, lots of questions. So the hard part is waiting to see how it's going to turn out. So, but okay.
well, and I could just add that, just to give you a practical example, if we're in a 20 trillion economy, and we have one additional percentage of growth, that's going to be $200 billion. The federal government will get about 20% of that, so that's $40 billion. Now, of course, it's going to escalate over the 10 years. So a 1% additional improvement will probably wind up returning about $1 trillion to the federal government. But
Over a 10-year
period. So I'm not too concerned about that deficit figure. I mean, it's a static analysis, is it not, from CBO? Tax Foundation came up with a number of $500 billion. I heard a Republican senator who I respect, I forgot his name, he said it's probably going to be net neutral effect on the deficit. And it depends on other issues, you know. It depends on anything that can affect the economy. So I'm not too concerned about that issue.
Okay. All righty. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about the Russia issue and why we are still not able to block Russia interference in our elections. You mentioned something to me a few minutes before the show started, Vince, about the surveillance that was happening way back, even before Trump. It was happening with Obama. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, the Office of Director of National Intelligence actually first reported the Russian interference with the 2016 election in October of 2016, before the elections actually occurred. Made the then President Obama aware of it, and President Obama has actually contacted Vladimir Putin and supposedly scolded him for doing that. Of course, Vladimir Putin denied it, and he still denies it. NPR just put out a report on January 10th that over the last few years, there's been evidence that Vladimir Putin has interfered in 19 European elections.
Wow.
So they're doing it. The Russians are doing it. And I would suspect that it's just like anything else. As soon as we get good enough to catch and stop, they get better. They find a new route in. Most of their route during the 2016 election, to my understanding, was social media. Making just making spurious Facebook posts and different accounts that didn't really exist, but they were actually Russian accounts. And the ONI also said that their initial take on it was not that Vladimir Putin was wanting to help Trump, although that was the sidebar of it.
Right.
What he wanted to do was hurt Hillary.
Right.
He was not a fan of Hillary Clinton. Of course, whoever would have been running against had Marco Rubio won the Republican primary, it would have helped him, whoever it was. Of course, now that's cascaded into what part did Trump have in colluding with the Russians to do anything like that? And thus far,
we still don't know.
We don't know, but there's been a special prosecutor that's been looking into it for over a year now, almost a year, and he has not yet had anything come to fruition other than a couple of charges for things that people had done completely outside of the campaign in their prior lives in business. So I don't know if there is anything going to come from that.
It's almost like it's so hard. There must be somebody on the inside, so to speak, intercepting everything. It just seems a little too easy for Putin right now.
Well, and I would expect that since we have no elections going on now, Russia's stopped. You know, they've stopped meddling because there's nothing to meddle. They have no reason to meddle now. So any threads that we had through intelligence to pull on, they've kind of disappeared because it's stopped. So until we have the next formal election that he's interested in, that's when we're going to have all of our guards up.
Okay, well, hopefully we'll get a little smarter and maybe we'll figure out a way to stop Putin before he gets started. You know, what do you think about that, Rick?
You know, the thing that I can add is I usually don't focus on foreign policy issues, but about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, before the Russians invaded the Ukraine, I started reading the Kremlin RU website. I wanted to read the words from the horse's mouth. So I've been reading Putin's speeches and the answers at the press conferences. He does an annual press conference. It's like 3.5 hours or so. And I know how he thinks. I know what his positions are. I can tell you this, our media, if it was mature, it would say, okay, this is Putin's position. This is why it's wrong. They don't do that. It's the same kind of thing, same kind of approach that happens on domestic politics. It's a personalization. It's an emotionalization, if that's a word. It's a demonization in some sense. And it's a disrespect of the views of, it's even if you take Putin out of the picture, the Russian people believe in those positions. They think that NATO is encroaching too much on that territory. They think the opposite as a lot of American citizens because of the views and how it's presented by the media. I'm amazed at how immature the approach is.
Well, in line with that, I think Vladimir Putin is a hero in his country. I think the populace of Russia think he's taking the exact right stand. You know, what was it, mother country? Is that what the Russian saying was? Motherland or whatever it is. So I agree with Rick that our media doesn't do journalism anymore. They do editorials. They take a little piece of information and they report it, but they don't research it. They don't do journalism. There's no deep throat journalism anymore.
Not anymore.
You know,
it's definitely a dying breed there. You know.
Well, and it came about with the 24-hour news cycle and all of that. You've got to be first. You've got to have something on the air, and so what you put on the air is what you have, whether it's well researched or not.
Right. Right. And then it could be debated on social media, back and forth. I think a lot of time is being spent on that. Well, we're almost out of time, but I did want to touch a little bit on immigration, what's happening now with the Dreamers. Young, undocumented immigrants have spent the fall and winter wondering about their fate and waiting to see if Trump what's going to happen to them and what Trump and the congressional leaders are going to do. That must be terrible. You're in this country, you've gone to school in this country, and you don't know if all of that's going to be taken away and you're going to be deported back to your country. I cannot imagine how they're feeling about that. And we're talking about people who have they've already gone to high school, they're in college, they are getting ready to set up their plans, their dreams, but they don't know if they should be doing that.
Well, I mean, I think there's an overwhelming majority to allow them to stay. That's probably in some ways following the wishes of the citizens who were polled on this issue, and they say, what, 60, 70% believe that they should be allowed to stay. The issue is, what is Trump going to get in return on the chain migration and the lottery and any other issues that they're looking for?
What does Trump have to gain if he sends them back? What does he have to gain by doing that?
Nothing, but he's not going to send them back.
You don't think so?
No.
Yeah.
He's using the DACA program as it's a card he's playing to get other things he wants.
Like the wall, for example?
You know, yes, part of it. That's part of it. But he also wants a merit immigration plan. That people coming to this country come here because of the merit that they bring. He doesn't like the lottery concept. He doesn't like the chain migration concept of where family follows family and follows and all that. He believes in, my understanding, he believes in family coming, like a father, a mother, the kids. And that's about as far as the chain goes. Where it's currently mother, the father, the kids, the cousins, the aunts, the uncles, the grandmother, the grandfather. So it can keep right. So that's what he's fighting for, and that's part of the Republican platform.
Do you agree? Do you agree with that?
Do I agree with the platform?
Having
yes.
it stopped at, you know, the mother, the father, and
I do.
stopping at that.
I do.
Okay.
I do. I mean, not that the others can't come through some other merit way, but just that the chain migration itself is limited. So that it just cannot continue to go like that. The DACA, the DACA folks are only about 800,000 people.
Well, that just got increased now. There was a USA Today article that found it was like 4 million. I don't know if you,
I read that. Here, when they started the DACA program, they projected that 1.76 million would be eligible for it when President Obama started it in 2012, I believe it was. But only 800,000 of them actually applied for it. So either their tallies were off to start with, or the people didn't want to take advantage of it. And to be quite honest with you, our immigration program is so haphazard that if you told me that I was that I could sign up for a deferred program, but I have to give you my name, and you'll defer my deportation, I'm not sure I would give you my name. I would just stay in the shadows because deferred action for childhood arrivals in the name of the program itself says you're not safe. You've got a temporary hiatus on whatever could happen to you, and now, and you know, Trump did in my opinion, what was the right thing to do if he was going to end it. He said, it'll end on this date, which is March next month, but he gave a 6-month window. From the time that he announced that, he said, Congress, figure out how to fix this.
And we're going to have to end on that, actually. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I would like to thank Rick and Benson for joining me, and I will see you next time when we meet again for Play Politics. Take care.